My daughter-in-law had been secretly taking photos of me, captioning them, "Rock bottom. Guess who we live with? Old lady in a robe." She shared them in a private circle where everyone laughed. Everyone but me. I didn't shout, didn't cause a scene. I simply recorded my screen, just a few seconds of truth. Then, one click, the family group chat, one silence, shared by all. And in that silence was everything they were afraid to hear. Because shame doesn't become unbearable when you feel it, but when others see it. If this story resonated with your soul, click subscribe and let me know in the comments which city or country you're listening from. I'm truly curious to know where you're tuning in from. My name is Marilyn Clark. I was 65 years old and retired, though the word retired never sat quite right with me. I had been a first-grade teacher for nearly 4 decades, and even after stepping away from the classroom, my instincts never left. I still found myself stacking books by height, folding towels into perfect thirds, and smiling at children I didn't know in grocery store aisles. Teaching wasn't a job to me, it was something in my bones. And yet, the world had a way of moving on without you once you slipped out of your title. After my husband passed away from cancer, I lived alone in the house we had built together in Tucson, Arizona. It was a modest place, a white ranch-style home with creaky floors and a stubborn front door that never quite closed without a tug. The walls held decades of laughter, worry, and routine. I had planned to stay there, to live out the rest of my days surrounded by memories and the hum of my own rhythm. But when my son Daniel asked me to come live with him and his wife Jenna after they had their first child, I didn't hesitate. They lived in Mesa, a couple of hours from me. The neighborhood was neat and new, all pastel stucco and manicured lawns. Their house had high ceilings and open space, with more windows than walls. It felt sterile to me, like a model home that no one had truly settled into yet. But Daniel was insistent that they wanted me there. "You'll help us so much," he had said, "and it'll be good for all of us to be closer." At first, I believed him. I moved in with 2 suitcases and a heart full of good intentions. I told myself I would be useful, but not overbearing. Helpful, but not intrusive. I imagined mornings spent preparing bottles and singing lullabies, afternoons folding baby clothes and reading picture books. I thought Jenna and I might bond over motherhood, over the common ground of worry and sacrifice. I imagined she'd see me as an ally, not a relic. But from the beginning, there was a distance between us. Jenna was polite but clipped. Her thank yous felt like punctuation, not gratitude. She always smiled, but it was the kind of smile that disappears the moment you look away. She called me Marilyn, never Mom or even Mrs. Clark. Just my name, flat and neutral, like a title she hadn't asked to use. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. Sleek and sharp, always put together in neutrals and gold. Her hair never had a strand out of place, and her voice never rose above a measured tone. Their home mirrored her. Everything was white, beige, soft gray. I brought a patchwork throw with me, hand-stitched, warm, and colorful, and draped it over the back of the couch one afternoon. By morning, it was gone, folded neatly and placed at the foot of my bed with no word. I baked once, apple pie, Daniel's favorite since he was 8. The cinnamon scent filled the kitchen, and I caught the baby smiling in his bouncer. But Jenna didn't eat any. She took a photo of the pie, posted it online with a caption about sugar bombs from the past, and later that night, the pie was quietly tossed into the compost bin. I began to feel like a character from another era, dropped into a modern stage play where I didn't know my lines. I wore floral blouses, sturdy shoes, and reading glasses on a chain around my neck. Jenna wore minimalist linen, wireless earbuds, and spoken abbreviations I didn't always understand. She drank smoothies with protein powder and rolled her eyes when I offered toast. I wasn't offended, I was simply out of sync. Still, I tried. I kept the baby when she had meetings. I cleaned the kitchen without being asked. I refilled the diaper bag, folded the laundry, stocked the fridge. I never expected praise. I only hoped for acknowledgement. But the more I did, the more invisible I felt. I began to wonder if my presence in the house was like an old lamp, functional but aesthetically displeasing, something to tolerate, maybe even hide, but never showcase. Daniel was always busy. His job in tech demanded late hours, long calls, and a permanent furrow in his brow. I didn't want to burden him, so I kept my thoughts to myself. I watched him kiss his wife's cheek, tickle the baby's toes, and scroll through his phone without once asking how my day had been. I told myself it was just a phase, that once the newborn chaos settled, we would connect again. But deep down, I knew something had shifted, and not in my favor. I spent more time in my room, a converted guest room at the end of the hall. It was quiet and cold, decorated in neutral tones, with no trace of me. I tried to make it mine, added a small framed photo of my husband on the nightstand, placed a few old books on the shelf, kept a mug with a chipped edge by the lamp. But even there, I felt like I was borrowing space. Some evenings, I would hear Jenna talking on the phone in the living room. Her voice would dip when she mentioned me. Once, I caught the phrase, like living with a grandmother from a sitcom. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I did. And something in me stiffened, then folded. I wasn't looking for worship. I wasn't even looking for gratitude, but I was hoping, perhaps naively, for dignity, for space to exist in this family, not as a ghost of a previous generation, but as a human being with memory, purpose, and heart. I was not like them. I didn't document every moment for strangers online. I didn't sip green juice or post about energy shifts. I believed in eye contact, handwritten notes, and pies baked from scratch. That made me outdated in their world, but in mine, it made me real. And yet, in their world, realness was often a liability, a thing to be managed, softened, reframed. I began to see it in the glances, in the pauses, in the way Jenna flinched when I walked into the room mid-video call, like I was the background she hoped no one noticed. That was when the seed of suspicion began to grow. Quiet, slow, but steady. Something wasn't right, and I was no longer sure I was imagining it. At first, it was just a feeling, a flicker of discomfort when I caught her glancing at her phone while I passed through the room. She never quite looked directly at me, but I could feel her eyes tracking me from behind the screen. It wasn't the way people looked when they were simply scrolling. It was too deliberate, too timed. I would be reaching for a dish towel, bending to retrieve something from the lower cabinet, or standing in my robe at the window, and there she would be, phone in hand, positioned just so. I tried to dismiss it. Paranoia, perhaps, the result of living too quietly for too long. But I'd been a teacher for most of my life. I had eyes in the back of my head. I knew what it looked like when someone was trying to hide something in plain sight. And whatever Jenna was doing, it wasn't accidental. One afternoon, while babysitting my granddaughter in the nursery, she handed me her little tablet. She was only 4 and barely knew how to navigate it, but she had tapped open an app that looked familiar. It was Instagram. Her mother's account, as it turned out, was still open. I almost put it down immediately. I didn't snoop. I never had. But something on the screen made me pause. There I was, in a photo. I was standing at the kitchen sink in my robe, my hair pulled back messily, the light hitting me from an unflattering angle. I looked tired, soft, worn, the kind of moment no one would ever intentionally preserve unless they wanted it seen. The caption read, "When your aesthetic is 1942 house ghost energy." There was a laughing emoji beside it, a few clapping hands, some comments underneath, all from names I didn't recognize. Jenna's friends, co-workers, probably women her age. Most of them thought it was hilarious. I felt my breath catch in my chest. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was just a joke, an offhand moment of bad taste, but something in me knew better. I navigated to her profile. It was private, as I expected, but there was a section labeled Close Friends. It was a feature I had heard about in passing, a way to share select stories with a curated audience, a private circle where one could be more authentic. Authentic. I scrolled through a few saved stories, most of them lighthearted, and then I found them. The posts. There was one of me sitting on the porch in my sweater, drinking tea from my chipped mug, legs tucked under me as I watched the baby play in the yard. The caption read, "Sweater weather meets grandma cryptid." Another, where I was dusting the hallway bookshelf. Exorcism not scheduled yet. Some had filters, grainy black and white tones. Others zoomed in unflatteringly or caught me mid-motion, mid-expression, mouth open, eyes half closed, or leaning awkwardly. Each post was carefully curated to make me look foolish, old, ridiculous. Each caption was written with the precision of someone who wanted to humiliate without appearing cruel. I didn't cry. My body didn't even react at first. I just stared. The worst kind of shock is the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't knock you down, but rather removes the floor under your feet an inch at a time. I sat there, holding the tablet in my lap, and scrolled through the little pieces of myself that had been turned into content. There were hashtags. Living with it your daily drama. Don't behair. Each post chipped away at me, not because I looked silly. I had lived enough years to know my appearance didn't define my worth. No, what hurt was the intent, the calculation, the coldness. She had invited me into her home. I had held her child in my arms, washed her dishes, folded her clothes, baked bread for her family, and in return, she had been documenting me like I was a circus act, something to be shared and laughed at behind digital doors. It wasn't just mockery, it was betrayal dressed in emojis. The next few days passed in a fog. I said nothing. I went about my routine, tidying the kitchen, folding blankets, walking with the baby. Jenna was her usual self, cordial, polite, distant, but I saw her differently now. Every smile felt brittle. Every thank you rang hollow. And yet, I didn't lash out. I didn't confront her. I had learned in my lifetime that anger rarely changes hearts. What it does, if used carefully, is reveal them. So I waited. I kept my eyes open. I noticed every time her phone flicked toward me. I took mental notes of what she wore when she did it, what time of day it happened, what room. She had a pattern, a rhythm. And now I was listening. One evening, I stood at the kitchen island, chopping carrots for a stew. I heard the sound of her phone camera shutter, just once, quick, soft. My back was turned, but I didn't move. I didn't need to. I had all the confirmation I needed. She wasn't just ashamed of me. She wanted others to be ashamed of me too. That was the difference. That was the line. There was something particularly cruel about how quiet it all was. No slammed doors, no raised voices, no accusations, just silence layered over insult, a digital kind of disdain, one that left no bruises, only screenshots, It wasn't public humiliation in the town square. It was curated, controlled, and distributed like gossip with a filter. And I had discovered it too late to unsee any of it. Jenna's close friend circle wasn't large, maybe 20 or 30 people from what I could tell. Most of them were women around her age, former classmates, yoga friends, co-workers from the advertising firm where she worked part-time. Their bios were full of avocado toast and self-care mantras. They shared stories about skincare, parenting wins, and husbands who didn't load the dishwasher properly. And they laughed. A lot. Especially at me. I was a running theme in her content. A backdrop character that had, over time, become her favorite punchline. She never named me directly. That was the genius of it. The deniability. Just enough to keep it from looking cruel to an outsider, but obvious enough that everyone in that circle knew exactly who I was. She gave me nicknames: The Relic, Mrs. Colonial, Live-In Lore. She referred to our house as the museum, and to me as the docent. The photos ranged from mundane to invasive: me dozing off on the couch, me kneeling to clean a spill, me adjusting my cardigan, me clapping softly after the baby took a step, each image accompanied by a caption meant to entertain her private audience. Spotted the ghost that makes casseroles. She offered me tea and unsolicited 1950s advice. Why does she fold socks like it's a sacred ritual? Sometimes there were short videos. One showed me humming while washing dishes with the caption, "If trauma had a soundtrack." Another panned over my collection of ceramic birds on the windowsill, paired with the words, "She feeds them names and crumbs." The comments stung more than the posts. Friends chimed in like it was a game. "This is gold. Tell me you live with a boomer without telling me. You're a saint for surviving this." Hearts, laughter emojis, gifs of eye rolls. The thread beneath each post was a digital echo chamber affirming Jenna's narrative. That I was backward, embarrassing, cringe as they called it. I sat one evening and watched them all. Every story, every comment, every eye that had seen me without seeing me at all. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just sat with it. Let it wash over me. Let it carve its message deep. They didn't hate me. That would have been easier. What they felt was worse. They dismissed me. They had filed me under harmless nuisance, someone to mock for laughs and then forget about until the next time I wore an unfashionable sweater or used a phrase that wasn't trending. The betrayal wasn't just Jenna's. It was collective. It was everyone who watched and said nothing. Everyone who laughed without asking whether I ever saw it. Everyone who reduced a full human life to a string of caricatures. I thought of all the small things I had done without asking. Sweeping the floor twice when the dog tracked in dirt. Refilling her almond milk before she noticed it was low. Hemming the edge of a curtain that had started to unravel. None of it was worthy of fanfare. I didn't expect praise, but I never expected ridicule. That night, I turned off the lights early and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I listened to the muffled sounds of Jenna's voice downstairs, laughing on the phone with one of her friends. I imagined her sharing another one of her little stories, another inside joke, another piece of me, stripped of kindness and served for consumption. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something hot and undeniable rise in me. Not rage, not vengeance, something sharper, something cleaner, clarity. I wasn't going to ask for her respect anymore. I wasn't going to teach her empathy or beg for grace. I had done my time with silence, with patience, with shrinking myself to fit the narrative. Now I was paying attention. Now I was watching her as closely as she watched me, and unlike her, I didn't need a circle of friends to justify what I saw. I just needed the truth to reveal itself. Frame by frame, caption by caption. Because one day, those little moments she thought were private would speak louder than any confrontation ever could. And when they did, I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't have to. I had never considered myself a particularly tech-savvy person. I used to joke that I could teach a room full of 6-year-olds to read, but couldn't program my own coffee maker. Still, life has a way of forcing you to adapt, even when you'd rather not. And so, late one night, with the house quiet and still, I sat down with my tablet and started learning. I began with the basics: how to record a screen, how to save a story without alerting the poster, how to organize files discreetly. It was tedious at first. My fingers stumbled over buttons. I watched video tutorials twice, sometimes 3 times. But slowly, I started to understand the logic of it, how everything was designed to look effortless, but left trails if you knew where to look. I waited until Jenna posted again. I didn't have to wait long. It was a Monday morning. She was in the kitchen making her smoothie, and I was wiping down the counter after breakfast. I could see her phone in her hand, angled low, her thumb tapping quickly. The baby was in the high chair babbling to herself. Jenna glanced at me once, briefly, then back at her screen. That evening, I checked her account. A new story had been uploaded to her close friends circle. A short video clip, maybe 6 seconds long. It showed me bending down to pick up a dropped spoon. My back was turned, and the lighting was unflattering. The caption read, "Jump scare at 8 a.m." with a ghost emoji and 3 laughing faces. This time, I was ready. I opened the screen recorder I had practiced with. I hit record. I let the story play through once, then again, just to be sure. I saved the file under a folder I had created on my tablet, titled "For Later." It was the first real piece of evidence I had, not just suspicion, not just memory, but truth, time-stamped, captioned, and shared. Over the next week, I gathered more. She posted often, almost daily. Some stories were of the baby, the dog, her lunch. But woven between them, like thorns among roses, were pieces of me. Snapshots of my slippers, my knitting bag, the way I folded my arms when I watched TV. Sometimes she used voiceover filters. Once she filmed me dozing off in the recliner and added cartoon snoring sounds over it. Her friends loved it. They responded with hearts and crying laugh emojis. One even commented, "She's like a walking meme." Another wrote, "New content drop. I live for this series." I recorded all of it, every post, every comment, every moment that turned my existence into entertainment. The more I watched, the less it hurt. Not because I stopped caring, but because I stopped pretending. I had spent months trying to believe I was misreading things, that it was my fault for not fitting in, that I was too sensitive or old-fashioned. But the screen told the truth. The screen didn't filter its cruelty through pleasantries. The screen said exactly what was being said behind my back. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I began to feel a strange kind of resolve settle in me. Cold, calm, and certain. This wasn't just about me being disrespected. This was about erasure, about being turned into a caricature for people who knew nothing about me. They didn't know I had buried a husband after 38 years of marriage. They didn't know I had taught over 1,000 children to read. They didn't know I had once spent an entire winter knitting scarves for a local shelter. All they saw was a fuzzy outline of a woman, curated to look pathetic. But I was not pathetic, and I would not let this version of me be the last word. I spent hours going through her archived stories. Instagram allowed users to save past stories in a private reel, and Jenna, with her obsession for aesthetics, had organized hers into folders. One was labeled Family Life. Inside were dozens of stories, some sweet, some neutral, and then a collection tagged Mill Moments, short for mother-in-law. I tapped through each one, recording carefully, storing the files, labeling the dates. I watched the arc of mockery unfold over time. It wasn't random, it was practiced, habitual, a part of her routine. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not Daniel, not my friends from church, not even my sister who lived 2 states over. I kept the truth close. I held it like a secret weapon, not to hurt, but to reveal. That was the difference. I didn't want revenge. I wanted exposure. I wanted everyone to see what I had seen. I wanted the mask to fall, not through confrontation or screaming matches, but through their own eyes, because people will excuse rudeness, misunderstandings, even meanness. But what they cannot excuse is clarity, the unedited mirror, the screen that doesn't lie. And when that mirror was ready, when every clip was saved and every caption documented, I would hold it up, not with rage, not with pride, but with quiet certainty. And I would let them look. It was a Sunday afternoon when I finally decided the time had come. The house was quiet. Daniel had taken the baby to the park. Jenna was in the bedroom, probably on one of her endless Zoom calls or scrolling through her curated online life. I stood in the kitchen, sunlight washing over the countertops, my tablet resting on the table like a silent witness. The folder I had created, labeled plainly as clips, was open. Each file had a title: Sync 7:43 a.m., Knitting Chair, Dozing with Book, Toast Mockery, a slow catalog of indignities wrapped in laughter and filters. I didn't feel rage. I didn't even feel sad anymore. What I felt was focus, stillness. My hands moved steadily. I opened our family group chat, the one Daniel had set up when the baby was born. It included his aunts, cousins, a few of Jenna's relatives, even her mother. It had once been full of baby pictures, holiday greetings, potluck recipes, but lately it had gone quiet, as if life had become too full or too busy for updates. I drafted no explanation, no preamble. I simply selected the videos, 3 to start, not the harshest, but the clearest, the ones where I was shown in my truest state, unaware, gentle, and unguarded. The captions Jenna had added did the rest of the work. Her words were louder than any commentary I could give. Her laughter in the background made it unbearable to deny. The first video was me folding laundry on the living room couch. The caption overlaid in white: "She treats socks like sacred scrolls," her voice snickering behind the camera. The second was of me dusting the shelves, her commentary mocking my obsession with order. The third was short, a snapshot of me picking up dropped yarn with the text: "Live footage of my email preparing to hex the living room." I attached them one by one. My thumb hovered over the final step, the blue arrow, the little triangle that turns a moment into a memory, a thought into a statement. I hesitated, but not out of fear. I hesitated because I understood the weight of that moment. Once it was done, it couldn't be undone. People would see what they hadn't wanted to see. And once you strip away the pleasant fiction, silence becomes very loud. I pressed send, 1, 2, 3. Then I turned off my tablet and stood by the sink. I looked out the window at the fence Daniel had promised to fix for months. I waited, not for replies, but for stillness. I didn't expect chaos. I knew better. People rarely explode in real time. What comes first is confusion, then denial, then the slow burn of realization. 10 minutes passed. No responses. 20. Still nothing. Then a notification. 1 check mark. 2. 3. Read by nearly everyone. Still no words. I imagined the screens lighting up across town. Aunt Linda in her kitchen, reading with her glasses perched on the tip of her nose. Jenna's mother stiffening in her recliner. Daniel maybe glancing at his phone while pushing the stroller. I imagined their eyes scanning the captions, hearing the laughter, watching me be turned into a joke. More messages were marked "Read." Still no replies. The silence was thunderous. I walked to the bedroom and sat down in the armchair where I usually read. My knitting lay untouched in its basket. The book I had been reading sat closed on the nightstand. I didn't reach for either. I just waited. An hour passed. Nothing in the chat. Not a single word. But I heard footsteps in the hall. Jenna's, fast and purposeful. She moved past my door without stopping. I could feel the heat of discomfort radiating through the walls. The kind of discomfort that comes when your reflection betrays you. When the version of yourself you've curated for the world begins to crack under truth. Still, no confrontation, no apology, just tension tightening the air like a wire pulled too far. Later that evening, Daniel came home. He said nothing unusual. He kissed the baby, asked what was for dinner. He didn't look at me directly. His voice was even, careful, measured. He had seen it. I knew it. Jenna barely spoke at all. That night, I watched the group chat again. Some members had left it. Others still hadn't replied. But none of them could unsee what I had shown. None of them could pretend they hadn't watched me be made into a joke, frame by frame. I didn't send anything else. I didn't need to. I had spoken without speaking. I had chosen truth over tolerance, and the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded because the screen never lies, and neither did I. In the hours after I sent those videos, the house didn't change, but everything inside it did. The walls still stood, the appliances still hummed, and the baby still babbled from her playpen. But the air felt thick, as if the truth had settled like dust, and no one knew how to breathe through it. No one said a word. Daniel avoided eye contact. He moved through the rooms like a guest in a stranger's home, deliberate, cautious, never lingering too long in one place. When I passed him in the hallway, he mumbled something about taking a call, though I hadn't asked. He disappeared into the garage for nearly an hour. When he returned, he walked straight past me and upstairs without a word. Jenna didn't speak to me at all. She didn't slam doors or raise her voice. She didn't deny or defend or demand. She simply removed herself from the shared spaces of the house as though I carried a contagion. She stopped walking through the living room when I was there. She moved through the kitchen in silence, her steps light and quick, her face unreadable. Her usual routines, music playing while she cooked, video calls with her friends, clinking laughter over glasses of wine, disappeared. In their place was silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that echoed. Every action she took was now careful. She didn't leave her phone lying around anymore. She held it closer, typed more slowly. She scrolled without sound, and I could see her thumb hovering, hesitating, unsure. The screen that had once been her window to mockery now stared back at her with the weight of exposure. She had been seen, and the seeing had changed everything. There was no confrontation. That would have been easier. Instead, we coexisted in a house that had become too small for the unspoken. I heard her whispering on the phone one evening in the backyard, pacing back and forth. I didn't catch every word, but I didn't need to. I knew that tone. It was the sound of someone trying to salvage an image, trying to spin reality into something smoother than it was. But there was no smoothing this. The group chat remained silent. No one wrote, no one joked. No one said, "What happened?" or "Are you okay?" Not even Daniel, not even her mother. The messages sat there, untouched and damning. The silence itself became an answer, a verdict, a quiet chorus of discomfort, shame, and maybe even guilt. At first, I thought I would feel triumphant, but I didn't. What I felt was sobering. I hadn't burned anything down. I had simply turned on the lights, and now everyone stood blinking in it, unsure how to continue pretending the darkness hadn't suited them better. The baby, too young to know any of this, remained my only comfort. She came to me without hesitation, her little arms reaching up, her smile wide and easy. I held her longer than usual those days. I let her fall asleep on my chest while I rocked slowly in the chair Jenna once joked looked like something from a thrift store horror movie. I looked at the soft curve of the baby's cheek and wondered what kind of world she would grow up in, whether kindness would still be mistaken for weakness by the time she was old enough to remember faces, voices, intentions. One afternoon, Jenna walked into the room and paused when she saw me holding her daughter. Her lips parted slightly, as if she were about to speak, but she didn't. Her eyes lingered for a moment too long before she turned and walked away. She never came back in. It was strange how silence could unravel a household more than shouting ever could. Every creak in the floorboards felt like a conversation never had. Every clink of dishes in the sink felt like a broken promise. I had lived through grief before, when my husband died, when I said goodbye to old friends, when the classroom door closed behind me for the last time. But this grief was different. It wasn't about losing someone. It was about recognizing that what you thought existed, mutual respect, shared space, decency, had never really been there at all. In the days that followed, Jenna's routines became quieter, clipped. She no longer wore her earbuds when walking through the house. She cooked in silence. She cleaned in silence. She looked at me differently, not with hostility, but with discomfort. I wasn't the same woman she had confidently mocked behind a screen. Now I was someone who had seen her without her mask. Daniel tried to stay neutral, but I could feel the distance he didn't know how to cross. One night, he stood outside my bedroom door for a moment. I could see the shadow of his feet beneath the frame. He didn't knock, he simply stood there, then walked away. I didn't chase anyone. I didn't press for apologies. I didn't explain what they had already seen. I simply lived. And in that silence, louder than any argument, clearer than any excuse, the truth grew too large to ignore. They weren't talking about it, but they were living in it. And so was I. The silence lingered like fog in the house. It dulled every sound, softened every footstep, wrapped every room in tension so thick you could taste it. No one spoke of the videos. No one acknowledged what had been exposed, but it hovered in the background of every glance, every half-finished sentence, every polite gesture that now rang hollow. A week passed, then another, and still nothing. Until one morning, Daniel knocked on my door. It startled me, partly because he rarely knocked, and partly because I had almost forgotten what his voice sounded like when it wasn't filtered through distraction. He asked if we could talk. "Just a moment," he said. I nodded, stepping aside as he entered my small, tidy room. The same room where I had spent countless quiet hours pretending not to feel out of place in a home that technically belonged to him. He didn't sit. He stood by the window, looking out at the backyard like he needed something steady to rest his eyes on. I waited. He told me he had seen everything, the videos, the captions, the comments. He said he didn't know. He said it again, like repetition might turn it into a defense. I didn't interrupt. I didn't offer comfort. I simply listened. Then he asked the question I knew was coming. Why hadn't I told him sooner? It was a fair question and an unfair one at the same time. I wanted to tell him that I had tried, in 100 subtle ways, in quiet retreats from conversations, in the way I stopped bringing my pies to the table, in how I stayed in my room more often, how I kept my voice low, how I smiled less. I had spoken through silence, through absence, through the tiny ways I stopped showing up as myself. But those aren't things sons notice when they believe their world is balanced, when they trust that politeness means peace. So I simply said that I wanted him to see it for himself. And now he had. He nodded slowly. Then he said something I hadn't expected. He said the hardest part was not the videos themselves, or even Jenna's cruelty. It was realizing how easy it had been for him not to notice, how comfortable he had become in assuming I would always absorb the discomfort, that I would take the smaller chair, the quieter role, the background space. He said he was ashamed. I looked at him then, my son, now a man, standing before me not as a protector, not as a provider, but as someone finally beginning to see, not just me, but his own participation in my invisibility. Then he asked if I remembered a photo. A very old one. He was maybe 7 or 8, wearing a red t-shirt with a dinosaur on it, holding a trophy he won at a science fair. He said it used to hang in the hallway of our old house. I remembered it immediately. I remembered the moment, the smell of lemonade, the way his eyes had lit up when they called his name. He said he had looked at that photo 1,000 times growing up, but until recently, he had never really seen what was in the background. Me, kneeling next to him, beaming with pride, holding his backpack, one hand on his shoulder, cropped at the edge of the frame, half shadowed, blurry, but there. He said he found the original again, scanned and saved on his old laptop. He looked at it the night after I sent the videos, and for the first time, he really saw me. Not as decoration, not as backdrop, but as the woman who had stood beside him all along. Then he asked me the question that nearly undid me. How do I make this right? It wasn't a question I had prepared for, because, truthfully, there is no right. There is no clean repair for that kind of erasure. You can't rewind the months someone spent treating you like a joke. You can't unfeel the sting of humiliation. You can't reclaim dignity that was handed back to you only after exposure. But you can choose what to do next. I told him the truth, that I didn't need grand apologies or sweeping change. I just wanted to be seen, not as a relic, not as a burden, but as a person still becoming. He nodded again, eyes wet. He hugged me gently, like someone afraid of breaking what was already fragile. After he left, I sat alone with my thoughts. I looked at my own collection of photos, some printed, some saved on a flash drive. I wondered how many of them included people who had been half seen, how many of us had faded into the background of our own lives, waiting for someone to realize we had been there all along. Later that day, Jenna didn't speak to me. She didn't look my way, but she walked past a mirror in the hallway and paused, just long enough to see her reflection, just long enough, perhaps, to ask herself what kind of person had taken those videos, what kind of woman had pressed record and called it harmless fun, and whether she still recognized that woman. The silence continued, but it had changed. Now it wasn't just avoidance, now it was awareness. And awareness always lingers longer than shame, because once you really see someone, you can't unsee them. And once you've been seen, you don't shrink back. You take up your space, even if you're still slightly out of focus in someone else's frame. Something shifted in the house, quietly, after Daniel spoke to me. The weight hadn't lifted, but it had settled differently, like furniture rearranged in a room you thought you knew. The corners looked sharper. The light fell in unfamiliar ways. I still moved carefully through the space, still kept mostly to myself, but it no longer felt like hiding. It felt like choosing. Jenna kept her distance, not out of anger, not even out of embarrassment. It was something deeper, a discomfort she couldn't mask. She walked slower when I was in the room. Her voice lowered to a whisper when she took calls near the kitchen. She had become cautious in a way she never was before. That instinctive confidence she wore like perfume had faded. Now she watched herself. She never apologized, not in words, but she didn't need to. Shame speaks in glances. It speaks in the way someone no longer laughs in the places they once owned with cruelty. It speaks in the way they avoid the mirror. For weeks, the energy between us existed in a strange truce. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but the absence of further damage. A mutual understanding that nothing would be as it had been. She no longer posted. I knew this because I checked. Her close friends list was gone. Her stories were short and impersonal now. Flowers, coffee, a child's scribbled art. Nothing of me. Daniel, for his part, became more attentive. He checked in more often, asked how I was sleeping, started joining me for tea in the evenings again. It wasn't a performance. It was something quieter, maybe even guilt, but also effort. The first real effort in a long time. And still, I said nothing more about the videos. I didn't gloat. I didn't ask for a confrontation or force a heart-to-heart, because this was never about breaking her. It was about freeing me. I stopped asking permission with my presence. I moved through the house with steadier steps. I started putting my books back on the shared shelves. I baked again, not as a gesture of peace, but because I wanted to. I played music while I cooked. I laughed when the baby threw blueberries on the floor and didn't care who was watching. One afternoon, Jenna stood in the doorway and watched me dance a little to the radio while stirring batter. I didn't stop. I didn't shrink. I didn't offer a smile to make her more comfortable. I let her sit with it, because the thing about shame is that it only destroys you if you never meet its gaze. She had spent so long being ashamed of me, of my clothes, my mannerisms, my way of belonging to another time. But the truth was, I had never been ashamed of who I was. I wore my life on my face, in my hands, in my voice. I had earned every wrinkle, every quiet strength, every moment of softness she mistook for weakness. She had ridiculed me to feel superior. But now that everyone had seen it, the family, her friends, herself, she could no longer pretend it was harmless. The laughter had stopped, and in its place was a silence that told the real story. She was ashamed, but not of me, of what she had done to me. That's how it works. Shame doesn't always come when you mock someone. It comes when someone sees you mock them and doesn't flinch. It comes when they don't beg you to stop, but instead show the world who you've become. I could have left the house. I could have packed my bags and gone to live in a senior community or found a quiet apartment near my church friends, but I didn't, because this was my home too. She may not have asked for me to be here, but I had been invited. I had earned my place, not by force, but by presence, by care, by staying when it was easier to walk away. In the end, that was the real story. Not the videos, not the captions, not the shame that clung to her like smoke. It was the fact that I had survived being mocked, overlooked, diminished, and I had chosen not to disappear. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition. And when it didn't come in words, I let it come in silence, in the uneasy quiet that followed the truth. I never told her that I forgave her, because forgiveness, like apology, means nothing if it's not felt. But I stopped holding her in my hands like a wound. I let her become something else, someone who had to live with what she'd done, and with who she had been while she did it. And I walked forward, with shoulders square, with my name still mine, with my dignity intact. Because once you've stood in someone's shame and not made it your own, you never go back to being small again. You grow, and you don't ask anyone's permission to do it.